Hey folks, it's Don. This is a special edition of The Naturalist coming to you from New Mexico. I'm on the outskirts of Santa Fe, and I'm about to climb Atalaya Mountain. So let's go. I'm starting my journey today near St. John's College, where there's some parking areas for this trail system and where the trailheads begin. And so right across the arroyo here, this dry wash, is St. John's College, or at least part of St. John's College. And our goal is to hike the top of the mountain, which is out in the distance. We'll have better views here soon. But yes, our hike starts here, bordering this arroyo in a sea of New Mexican junipers. So if I were in Ohio, I'd be looking at Juniperus virginiensis, but this is New Mexican juniper. Which is a shrub-like tree, beautiful sprawling tree that can tolerate the temperature extremes and the dry environment that this place represents. As I drove here from Albuquerque, it's just incredible to see how shaped by water availability the landscape is. We're getting into an area that has a little higher water availability, so you actually see plants, trees, evergreens, but along the way there was nothing but some creosote bush and mesquite and just dry territory. So we'll talk more about that as we go. So I'm just starting my walk up the arroyo. This is about a 4-mile hike up, and then I have to turn around and come back. So I'll just be stopping here and there and filling you in on what I see. So let's go. As I walk up this arroyo, I thought I would get some of my plant and tree identifications out of the way, because I have a long ways to walk today. So, and this arroyo, again, which is something that means basically a dry wash, only has water in it during the rainy season out here, and otherwise is a dry, sort of a gulch, if you will. But it's a little wetter than the nearby areas because it has had water at some point during the year. So it harbors quite a few plants here that are major parts of the vegetation here in New Mexico. So let me first point out there's a sea of this shrub you see out here, a sea that you see called rabbit brush. Okay, this is all, this is a woody shrub. These are last year's flowering heads that are, basically the seeds are probably mostly all gone, and it occupies, it's a low growing shrub that occupies a lot of the open areas here. Okay, I had already pointed out the New Mexican junipers to you. All right, so here are ones with cones. Okay, starting to, those look like male cones, and they will be starting to reproduce here soon. All right, and then we have a very small, small needled pine right here called pinyon pine. This has been very common on the walk so far. This is a 2-needle pine, so the needles are in bundles of 2, and try to show you that to you. Okay, needles in bundles of 2, and they have these small open cones. Let me see, I'll go try to find you that. Back here where I noticed some of that are just the scales are very wide spreading on the cones. Here's one. Okay, so here's the cone of a pinyon pine. Okay, after it's lost its seeds. The next tree I'd like to talk to you about is this pine in front of us. A little bit facing the sun, but this is a nice specimen of a ponderosa pine. This is one of the larger pines out here in the West. And let's take a look at the bark. Here's a thick, chunky bark that would be resistant to fire. Here, let's get it from a better angle. Okay, and they make a pretty large cone. This tree doesn't seem to have any cones. And there's another large one in the distance over there I'll try to get close to. But this is another tree that I've been encountering on the way. Here's some old cones. and they're kind of degraded. But there's a cone of a ponderosa pine from last year or a few years ago, maybe. Okay. All right, characteristic of the ponderosas. And just to contrast that, there's a ponderosa pine right here, and here is the pinyon pine I showed you lower down in the arroyo with those little open cones. You can see the difference in the needle length, for example, between those two. There's another nice specimen of a ponderosa pine right there. Okay, so I'm continuing up this arroyo. I've gone maybe about half a mile at this point, but this trail will be pretty much uphill the whole way. So I will stop periodically and show you my next highlights. So let's keep going. I'm just over a half mile up the trail. I've just been hiking up the arroyo, and I'm now going to cross a private road and get into more of the wild area here at this Atalaya mountain. So this is just my view at the moment. A couple hikers coming up the trail. Santa Fe is in the distance, and you can see the low hills, all formed by volcanic activity about 6 or 7 million years ago. All right, but now what we're going to do is cross the road here and continue up the mountain. So let's keep going. As I continue up the trail, I'm reminded that I'm going to be hiking a mountain today that's about 9,200 feet at the summit. And I live at 1,000 feet. And so a week ago when I gave a pint of blood, I apparently hadn't thought of that. All right, so it's hit me already for sure. So I'm going to be out of breath a little bit on this walk. But at this little spot, I thought I'd show you something we saw when we visited Arizona in November. And this is yucca. Okay, here's a nice individual plant growing right along the trail. I saw a little colony of these plants. Again, a plant that's adapted to these dry, harsh conditions. There's a nice grove under these pinyon pines up here. And that's very useful. As you can see, you can strip these leaves for fibers and make baskets and all kinds of things out of those fibers. Clothing, mats, what have you. So that's yucca. I'm sure we'll see more of that along the way. But it's the same sort of stuff. Pinyon pines, probably going to lose ponderosas at some point, or maybe gain them. We'll see. And the New Mexican junipers are very abundant. I've lost most of the rabbit brush, which is down in the arroyos primarily. But we'll see lots of other cool stuff. I've been seeing a handful of cacti on the way up here. I thought I'd stop to point out one of them to you. It's pretty common out here. And this is the cholla cactus. This is, I think, known as the tree cholla. And what you're seeing in yellow here are the fruits of this cactus. Okay, it's very spiny. These things, I touched one of those fruits and I got a little spine and I could hardly get it out. But those are apparently edible if you remove the spines. This very spiny cactus, so you have to watch out for. All right, moving on. I've reached a point about a mile and maybe a mile and a half up the trail where I've risen quite a bit. The scenery starts to broaden out. My view gets broader. And so I'm still heading in that direction. But I came from way down there, somewhere, that direction. And you can see I'm getting my New Mexican panoramic views at this point. Okay, of the colored rocks, the green vegetation in the canyons and mountainsides, and dry, dusty terrain in the flatlands. Okay, all shaped by volcanoes. So let's keep going up the trail. I mentioned below that I wasn't very acclimated to these conditions out here, these elevations. And that just brings to mind the studies that have been done on human populations that are of people who live at high elevations, like in the Peruvian Andes, for example, or in the Rocky Mountains. There's a couple ways a human can get used to living at high elevations. One is, you might say, ecological, and it's based on physiological plasticity. You do things like you breathe faster on average, your heart beats faster on average. So you continue to pump oxygen around your body simply by ramping up your cardiovascular system. That could be accompanied by things like changes in heart mass, heart volume and mass. Another way is an evolutionary way, and that is to evolve the ability to carry oxygen better, more efficiently in your blood by things like evolving higher hemoglobin levels or evolving a hemoglobin with a better oxygen binding and carrying capacity. And there is some evidence that that's occurred in some high elevation populations of humans around the world. So the first one would simply be called acclimation, okay? That basically happens to anybody when they start to experience lower oxygen levels. Like when you go for a run, you breathe faster, your heart pumps more quickly. That's certainly happening to me. But the other would be adaptation, an evolutionary response to low oxygen levels in your environment and the evolution of a form of blood with a form of hemoglobin that can carry oxygen better and permit you to exist and function at high elevations. All right, so I'm definitely feeling it today, and I thought, what the heck, I'd talk about those two things since I'm personally familiar with those things right now. All right, so let's continue up the trail. I've been witnessing, by the way, I'm saying about how out of breath I am. There have been people riding bikes up this trail, hiking very quickly. I haven't seen anybody running up this trail. It's all uphill. But, you know, and a lot of these folks are my age or older, all right? So they're not young bucks, so to speak. So it's pretty impressive. But it takes a few days. I'll be out in New Mexico for about 5 more days. I presume by the end of my trip, I'll be, you know, ready to run a marathon. We'll see about that. As I walk along, I took a fork in the trail that I don't normally do. I took the longer and easier route. I usually go the steeper and faster route. I'll take that one back down, but that's because of my acclimation or lack thereof. I want to talk just a little bit about the weather, climate. Today I started my trip in Albuquerque. Albuquerque was going to get to be about in the 60s today, Fahrenheit. Santa Fe was going to get to be in the mid 50s. So I'm about an hour or so north of Albuquerque here in Santa Fe. As I climb this mountain, it's getting cooler. It'll probably be 10 degrees cooler or so at the top than Santa Fe. But we'll see. I don't know if there'll be any snow up here at all or ice. I've seen very little of that so far. The other thing I'd like to do is dedicate this walk to Gene Hackman, who died about 10 days ago. He died in his home with his wife and dog, and he lived in a large house on a small acreage on the northwest side of Santa Fe. I'm on the east side of Santa Fe, and so I'm not going to go try to find his house or anything, but he was a great actor in 80-some movies, and some of my favorites like Young Frankenstein, The Firm. So this one's dedicated to Gene Hackman. All right, let's keep going. As I walk along and look at all this sea of junipers around me, every now and then some things stand out about them, other than the fact they're all cool and gnarly and old. But there will be these bunches of much brighter yellow foliage, what appears to be foliage on them. And if you look closer, what you actually are looking at, so here's a juniper in front of me. You see these sorts of things. And that is mistletoe. So that's a parasitic plant. Okay, this is one that parasitizes these junipers, probably other species. I'm not sure how species specific this one is, but our, well-loved holiday plant that you're supposed to, kiss someone under at Christmas time is a parasite. So Now, it is a hemiparasite because, as you can see, it does have pigments. I do believe it still photosynthesizes, so it's not fully dependent on its host for photosynthetic products like sugars, carbohydrates. There are parasitic plants that depend fully on a host and don't even photosynthesize anymore. Okay, but this is mistletoe. It is a flowering plant, and the way it makes a living again is by its seeds germinating up here on the branches of the juniper. Bird carried them there. They stick to the branches and they germinate right there. And then they insert a structure known as a hostorium into the vascular system of the plant and basically suck up water and nutrients from the plant and probably some sugars, but they can make it on their own as well. And a heavy mistletoe infestation can be a problem. I can see on this one that there is dieback of branches that mistletoes have been on or are currently on. Okay, so mistletoe is a parasitic plant that can produce some problems for their host when they get to be too abundant. All right, up the trail, not that way, that way. In front of me is a different evergreen now. Looks like a perfect landscape tree. That's because it is. This is white fir or concolor fir, ABs, and this is the first one I've seen on my hike so far. And so firs have very soft, very fragment needles. They're flat, and if you see, they point upward. They point upward from their twigs. All right, so that's a fir. They smell delicious. And you can see the difference between, say, a pine needle right here. Here's one of our ponderosa pines. Long, rounded, pointed needles. And our juniper right over here, okay, with these this clubby-like foliage when it's an adult, of course, with the male cones there. This has, again, very flat and soft needles. And these things make great landscape trees and Christmas trees. People use them for that as well. So there's a white fir on the way up to Atalaya Mountain. Now I have about a mile to go. That's what's facing me till I hit some switchbacks. So let's hope I make it. Getting higher and higher as I've walked past more of these concolor firs, pinyons, and the ponderosa pines. I looked at this pinyon pine by the trail and it looked different. So there's something on this one I'd like to point out. And so some of the needles here on this pinyon pine are really fat and swollen at the base. And what that is are actually galls of the pinyon spindle gall fly. Midge. It's a midge, a small fly. And so they give this kind of swollen appearance to the needles. I don't know if they're really much of an issue for these pines in terms of the health of them, but pretty cool. So that's again, the fly would lay its eggs probably in the developing foliage as it's coming out for the year, and the larva, the little maggot, would live inside that gall, feeding on the tissue inside that gall as it grew, and then it eventually emerges an adult at the end of the season or over after winter's over. So there you go. Just a note about wildlife. I haven't seen that many vertebrates on the hike. I've seen a handful of birds. I saw a very small brown lizard for just a second. And at this little stretch, I've been seeing some squirrels, which I believe are Albert squirrels, which rely on ponderosa pine nuts for a good part of their diet. So again, filming with a GoPro, it's hard to catch small animals at a distance. So I'm left to just tell you what I saw, and you'll have to believe me. But nonetheless, there are a few things, but it's mostly today about the sun, the trees, and the mountain. Pausing here as I catch my breath to show you in this part of the trail, it's quite steep. All right, you practically have to scramble through this part of the trail. All right, there's switchbacks to help you along the way. All right, but you're kind of, every now and then you're putting your front feet, your hands down to help you along the way. So, but once you get above this point, it starts to flatten out up to the peak. And there's a nice ponderosa pine behind this boulder, and this boulder has a beautiful display of lichens while I'm here. A couple of different species, okay, you can clearly see. Again, a symbiosis between algae and cyanobacteria. And actually there's some other players in the lichen symbiosis now as well, okay, that cooperate to form this structure that you see. Okay, so let's keep going. After seeing mostly conifers on this walk with a handful of herbaceous species, I finally up near the top of the mountain ran into a southwestern oak species. This one. This is gamble oak. And so here it's in the form of a multi-stemmed shrub or a small tree. Okay, but I did not see this anywhere until near the top of the mountain. So that's kind of interesting. That's one of our western oaks. You can see displaying this thing called marcescens. I've talked about on this series in the past, hanging on to its dead leaves from last year, and that it will not drop until this spring when it starts to add its new leaves. Okay, gamble oak. I've mentioned on my now 2 trips out west that the soil out in Arizona and New Mexico is of igneous origin, volcanic origin. 6 or 7 million years ago, these hills and mountains were formed. Boulders were blown out of volcanoes and volcanic ash was sprayed everywhere. And here's some really exceptional crystalline rocks I've encountered along the way. Okay, with very large crystals. This looks a lot like quartz. There's granite I've been seeing. Okay, there are pieces with smaller components, and then there are pieces like this that are like one large crystal. Really impressive. So this is a really interesting little quartz field, if you will. And I learned as I read about this stuff that these rocks with the very large crystal structures were formed from magma underground and cooled very slowly, and that allowed them to form very large crystals. And those rocks with smaller crystals cooled more quickly. Okay, so this piece of rock, for some reason cooled quicker, apparently, than this big chunk right here. Okay, so these are really cool. I haven't quite seen any clear white rocks like this on the way up. I saw mostly granite types and so forth, aggregates and so forth, but that's a little bit about some of the geology on the way. Well, I did a lot of hard hiking since I talked to you last. Steep, uphill, and I'm almost there. So hopefully this is the last sign until I reach the top. Oh. So onward we go. Well, after one of the harder hikes I've done in recent memory, I'm at the top of Atalaya Peak, Atalaya Mountain above Santa Fe. I'm at about 9,200 feet, and at the start of the trail where I parked and started at the lower trailhead, it's around 7,300 or 7,400 feet. So I had an elevation gain of about 1,800 feet. And the hike, I think, is anywhere between 4 and 5 miles. It's not clear. It seemed like 10 miles to me today, but nonetheless, I made it. And let's take a look. Okay, there's a view looking north. I've got a pinyon in front of me. And here's our view on top of Atalaya Mountain. Okay, in the center of our view is where I started. There's a collection of buildings. It would be St. John's College. And then there are some volcanic little domes, and Santa Fe is on the other side of those domes, close to us. Some view. It's a beautiful day. There were quite a number of people doing this hike today. There was a big group from Illinois here. out, I presume, on spring break actually. And I had to give them a minute to do their thing and clear out. So I currently have it all to myself. Atalaya means watchtower in Spanish. And you see exactly why this mountain has this name. I can't even guess how far I can see from the top of this mountain. Now, the tallest mountain in New Mexico is Wheeler Peak, and that's about 13 or 14,000 feet, 13,000 some feet. And so that's another 4,000 feet higher than where I am. And I'll be up in that vicinity. I'm heading to Taos next. So Wheeler Peak overlooks Taos. But there we go. Hike up Atalaya Mountain above Santa Fe, New Mexico. And with that, I'm going to conclude this episode. And my next one will be done in the Rio Grande Gorge area around Taos. So look forward to that one as well. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.